Hi, I want to do some decorative stitching today, but I want to do some kind of unique decorative stitching. These are some decorative stitches with open spaces in between them, and you stitch them continuously. You're not doing little individual motifs because that takes time, and who has the time to mess around with that? So these are open space stitches, and we're on the Brother. So we're going to use the Brother Stitch Creator to create our own specialty stitch. I'm Cathy. This is Sewing Tech Talk. Stick around. You might enjoy this. So we're in the sewing feature of the Stellaire. Let's create some unique decorative stitches. I'm going to call these open space stitches. Well, let's talk about decorative stitches before we begin. When you're doing a decorative stitch, well, there's a lot of fun stitches built into this machine. Maybe your machine too. But when you do a decorative stitch, what happens is it stitches continuously. So for example, when I did this stitch here, you see this is a really pretty stitch, and it's all continuous, one right after the other. The stitch I'm talking about is still stitched continuously, but there's no space in between. No space in between. So it looks like you did all the units individually, which takes time, which means you have to clip the thread, but we're going to stitch them absolutely continuously, and that saves a lot of time. I want to really thank Helen H. for not only suggesting this topic, but for graciously sharing with me her directions. So let's get started creating some open space designs. And because we're on the Brother, well, the Brother has a feature called Stitch Creator, and we can make our own stitch also right on the machine. So first, how do we do these open space stitches? Well, here we are in the basic utility screen of the machine, the utility stitches. We're going to go to Character Decorative Stitch. Now, this is a Brother, and it has all these different categories. Down here is where we have Stitch Creator and Saved Created Stitches. We're going to get to that at the very end. Now, when I do these stitches, what happens is they're stitched along. There's 3 different ways to stitch them. I talk about all of that in your handout. So here's your handout that takes you step by step through this process, and it has a little bit of information about Stitch Creator as well. So what I do is I go ahead and I stitch them. Here's, for example, one of the ways you can do that. This is along a seam. And notice here's the stitch coming right along here. And when you open up the seam, if you give it a little tug, what happens is you don't see that space in between. You have a seamed garment or quilt or whatever you want, but there's no visible stitching here. Now, you can also do that where you have no stitching in between and it's not a seam line or even a tuck. We'll get to that in a little minute, but let's create these stitches. So I'm going to choose a stitch that's wide. The swing of the needle on this machine is 7.0 millimeters. That's a pretty wide little stitch. And some of these stitches here in 9 or 8, this category, I put a pretty wide stitch, right? So I'm going to go to category number 9, and I'm going to choose this little motif right here. There's several motifs in this section that would work. This one would work, this one would work, all of these would work. But now when the stitch staggers back and forth, that kind of doesn't work for our technique. We want something that's kind of linear, right? There's other stitches in other categories. In your handout, I suggest some of those. But here's my little guy. Now, I want to modify this stitch to add that open space in between, right? So now on this particular machine, the way I modify and join and do different stitches together is I do the plus sign right up here. So by doing the plus, when that's highlighted, I can add other different motifs and stitches. Your machine might be slightly different. This is kind of a new style where we can play in decorative stitches. What's really neat about this machine is once I do that and I add different motifs, I can totally modify the size of that and each individual one. It's kind of a unique feature on this machine where we get to play with the decorative stitches. So I'm going to go return, and I'm going to add a straight stitch in the middle. Category 11 is all of those different straight stitches that I can add. So I'm going to add a straight stitch, and notice it added the straight stitch in the middle. Now I might want a bigger space, right? So I can go plus plus, add a different motif of those different straight stitches. So now I have a bigger space in between. If I want to modify each individual unit of this decorative stitch combination that I've put together, on this machine I totally can. I'm going to use this arrow right here to go up to my very first motif that I created. Now with these type of stitches in this machine, I can do something pretty neat also, is I have the elongation key, and by touching that I can make this stitch even longer, which I think is pretty cool. I can also, if it was a certain type of stitch, I can go flip it side left or up, side to side and up and down. Doesn't work for this stitch, but I do have those features. Now notice I'm over here in the stitch edit screen, and the icon here I want to show you is a single star and 3 stars. When I have a single star, it shows me simply just one motif. When I touch the 3 stars, it's going to show that motif repeated. Now if I want to see, I can only see so much. What I see is the actual size too. That's the actual size of that stitch. It works for me, but I want to see it more of the stitch, and I can touch this little piece of paper up here and it shows me that stitch, and I can even magnify it to get it a little bit closer to see what that stitch kind of looks like. I can even change the color if that matters to me. Yeah, let's go with red just because we can. Okay. Now I'm ready to do my stitching. I've already changed my stitch, set it up. I've elongated that stitch. If I don't want to modify it anymore, I'm good to go. So now, let's get to stitching. And I'm going to show you, this is the 3 different ways you can do it. This is kind of my favorite. Why? Well, because I love making garments, and I love making quilts too. And this seam adds interest to both of those. It's really fun, and it's super easy to do, because you can see setting up the machine doesn't take that much. So let's get this out of the way. And here is my 2 strips that I'm going to join. What I've done is I put them together, and because I'm doing a zigzag stitch that goes back and forth, I really want a piece of stabilizer underneath that. This happens to be a medium tearaway, and it's fusible, so I can fuse this to the one side of the fabric, the bottom part, so the fabric doesn't scoot around. This is a Floriani Heat and Stay, which is something that I fuse to the back, and like I said, it's a medium weight tearaway. I'm going to lower my foot. Now, I'm going to use this as a seam to join these 2 strips together. I also have another feature on the Stellaire which is pretty rockin', and that is the LED guide light. When I touch this light, I can actually have a light that shines down directly on my fabric and shows me exactly where I'm stitching. Or, in this case, I think I want to use it as a seam guide. So I'm going to take that light and I'm going to move it over to the right. And you can see its relationship to the stitch, right? So if I'm stitching along and I have that guideline right along the side of my raw edge right here, I'm going to use it as a seam guide. I can move it over a little bit more if I want. Yeah, I think that's a little bit better. Notice also that I'm using the Ultra T infoot, which makes the fabric flow just beautifully underneath the foot, and it reduces friction. So let's get to stitching, and then I'm going to show you the other 2 ways that this stitch could be used. So here we go. So there's my stitching. Now let's open up and see what we have. Oh my goodness. Look at how pretty this join is. That's a seam that really stands out. And I'm going to use that on a lot. I'm going to use it on my seams. I'm making a garment that has tucks over the top, and I'm going to use that in the tucks. They just release it. Oh, I just can't wait to get that garment made. Now I stopped in the middle of my motif, and I want to show you the feature on the machine if I want to go back to the beginning. If I want all my motifs on my tucks to match, I need to start at the beginning of this stitch, don't I? So if you look on the screen, if you see the needle with the star, heart, star, that takes it and that takes you to the very beginning of that stitch. So if I start on the right spot, the similar spot that I started before, my stitching on all my tucks should match. Pretty cool, right? Now, there's two other ways to do this stitch, and we can do it on a fold of the fabric, not necessarily on a seam, and we can also do it on the fold of the fabric so that you don't see the seam at all. Let me show you both of those. So here's my little piece of fabric, and I'm going to do that decorative stitch in between the two. And I'm going to lower my presser foot. Now, I'm going to move my guide light so it's just to the right side of that fold. On the screen, you can see that I need that stitching line right there. And I kind of want to stitch that just a little bit onto the fold for this particular technique. So now I can set up my machine and have that guide line pretty much right on the fold. I know I'm just going to catch a little bit of my fold as I go down. I fused the heat and stay to just the one side of the fold because this fold really wants to move, and now it's really stable on top of that stabilizer. So let's stitch right along in here and see what we get. I did it. I just caught my fold right here. I got my motifs. Let's open up the fabric and see what I have. So I have my open space stitches with a little seam in the middle. Now what if I don't want that? Well, I can totally do that too. Let's try that. Now I'm going to move my guide light a little bit over to the right, so I'm only stitching on the stabilizer and not on the fabric. So let's move that guide light over. So now when I'm sewing, I'm going to be sewing only my straight stitch right here and not on my fold, so I could get a true open space stitch. Let's go to the beginning of that stitch and let's see what I got this time. I'm going to sew a little bit slower because I kind of don't want to catch that fold, but I want to be real close to it. I did it. I sewed just a little bit off of the fold, both here and here. Let's open that stitch out and see what I did. Here we go. Oh my goodness, look, there is absolutely no stitching in between here, and yet I sewed it continuously. That's pretty fast. Now I'm going to take away my stabilizer. It's a tear-away stabilizer. I did try this with a wash-away stabilizer to see if that worked. It'd be easier to remove. I found that wash-away stabilizer wasn't as crisp at keeping my wide decorative stitch far apart. So I'm going to totally recommend tear-away stabilizer. Now, this is my little stitch, but let's go back to this one for just a second. Look at this guy. Here's that stitch, but what do I have in the middle? I have just a couple little nips, and I don't have that as a decorative stitch. Well, on the brother, I have something pretty cool called Stitch Creator. And I've looked on the internet, and I don't see a lot of content. So here I am. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Brother Stitch Creator. It's on a lot of their upper end machines, and you can use it to create absolutely your own decorative stitches. Now, The handout, I think, is going to be pretty useful for this because it goes through and it takes you through the main features of the Stitch Creator. But now, let's create a stitch. Here we go. I have this. If I want to keep it, I'm going to put it in the memory of the machine, but I want to go create my own. So I'm going to come back to, I'm going to take this down so I can see return. And I'm going to delete these stitches. So I have no stitches. Now I've created a stitch before, and when you've created a stitch, here's the stitch that I created. I put it on the memory of the machine. Now you can also put it on a jump drive or a USB drive. Here's the stitch I created. And you can recognize it, hopefully. This is what it looks like in comparison to when I stitched it out. But how did I get there? Well, let's go return and I'd like to show you. This is Stitch Creator. Oh, let's delete that stitch. Let's go to Stitch Creator. Now what you see when you pull up Stitch Creator is you have like a grid, you have like a drawing surface, and it has these tiny little grid dots on it. Now I can see this a little bit closer if I want by touching the magnifying glass. Now maybe you can see the dots a little bit, and it's done in millimeters, 5, 10, 15, and I can see it horizontally if I want to as well. I have all kinds of different controls so I can put a stitch in. So there's my little pencil. That's where I get to draw. So I'm going to move it, and it's automatically going to land on one of those dots. And when I hit set, boom, I put in a stitch point. When I move, notice how that's a red line. It's not a stitch yet. When I hit set, boom, I put in a stitch. You can sit down and play with this till the cows come home. I'm just going to come in and put some stitches. Say I don't want that one. Say I don't want this one. I made a mistake. What I can do is use the arrows here to go back to that stitch and take that point out. Say I want to put a stitch point back in. I can move and I can come on in. I can take that point and move it. I can go to the next point. I can delete that point if I want to, put in another one. You just come in here and you can kind of play. But what I think is really easy to do is, let's come in and let's move this back to 0. Delete that point. Now, you can bring in some of the stitches from the machine that are already there. I'm going to come back to the vertical orientation and use this button right here to pick some stitches. So I'm going to go here. That looks kind of familiar, doesn't it? And this is the stitch that we used before. Look at that. That's what that looks like when you graph it out. Pretty neat, right? If I take it back, then you can see, well, that's what that stitch looks like. Let's add a few more points. Let's add my little extra 2 little points. You already know how to do it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come down and I'm going to add my straight stitches. There, I added some straight stitches coming down. Now I want to make a quick little zigzag. I need another straight stitch at the end, don't I? And now I've created my fun little stitch. I've added that extra little point. Now, you want to see what you've done? Well, let's test the stitch. There's my test stitch, and it shows me exactly what it looks like. I'm going to have that point in the middle, maybe just a little bit closer to one side or the other. No problem. If I don't like this, well, I can totally come back and edit it and change it. There it is with a repeated stitch. Here's that star, 3 stars, and I can see just my one single unit if I want to. If there's any point up in here I want to change or modify, I can totally do that with the Stitch Creator. And it's the width of 7.0. I can actually see this and change the length of it. There, I've changed the stitch from what I've actually put in. And I can actually save that to the memory of the machine if that's what I want. If I'm not sure, right now the machine's ready to sew, I can test this stitch out and see if I have achieved what I really wanted to do. I'm pretty happy with it. One thing I want to tell you about also is the tension of the stitch. It's automatically changed for a decorative stitch. Maybe I want something that's a little bit less tension because I really want, when I open it out, I want to see it. The bobbin thread that I'm using a lightweight bobbin thread. This is Quilter Select Paracotton Poly. It's like an 80 weight, so it works really well for this stitch. You can use a matching bobbin, of course, but I find a lightweight bobbin works good for this technique. And so I can change this, I can change the tension down a little tiny bit. I kind of like the results when I do that. I'm very excited about this technique. Once again, thank you, Helen, for suggesting it and really sharing her directions. But the other thing I want to do is I want to tell you what else can you use this for, right? I can use it for quilting, I can use it for garment making, I can use it for tucks. I thought, well, I'm sewing on woven fabrics. It's working pretty good. But I have some really pretty knit fabric that I'm excited to make a little nightgown out of. I want to do those tucks, I want to do my seam, but it's a knit. Does a knit work? Well, there's two kinds of sewers, and I think you know who you are. The kind who test and the kind who wish they had tested. I tested this fabric by taking the selvage off, right? And I just used whatever thread that I had. It's an embroidery thread. But look at this. This is my seam in the selvage of this very knit fabric. Look how fun this seam is. Would I make these a little bit closer? Maybe. Would I add my fancy stitch? Maybe. Would I make my own fun stitch that has something to do with this? I don't know if I could do a bird, but it's worth a try, isn't it? Anyway, so this technique works on wovens, works on knits, works on tucks, works on quilts, works on garments, works on, well, I think you get the idea. I'm pretty excited about this. Thanks for watching me today. Don't forget to get your handout that takes you through step by this. And if you have a brother machine with Stitch Creator, dabble a little bit. I'm going to send it off to George. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, Kathy. That was an incredible presentation. And so let's go over the special offer we have on the Brother Stellaire series. So we have the XJ2, which is their combination sewing and embroidery, and the XE2, which is dedicated embroidery. They both share the same embroidery features, which is a large 9.5 by 14 inch embroidery area with over 780 built-in embroidery designs, and of them, over 100 of them are Disney. It also has over 30 fonts and large, beautiful monograms. And with the fonts, you can edit in all kinds of arrangements. You can arc, you can array, you can even cut and paste and kern it in some custom ways. Speaking of customization, you can take a design and do an automatic applique around it. And with the matrix copy, you can copy this very quickly to make patches. And if we had the scan and cut, we can actually send it to the scan and cut, cut out those patches, and then embroider them beautifully. An additional advanced technology is a new 2-point laser positioning. I can take something like a name and position it perfectly on a line. I can use it to do multiple hoopings and match them perfectly. I can even use it for edge-to-edge quilting. Now, part of what the Stellaire series offers is a special relationship with the scan and cut. They actually can marry together, so I can send an applique design right from my machine and it will cut it out perfectly for beautiful applique. But better yet, I can send a design from my scan and cut and turn it into embroidery. It also unlocks a new feature where I can choose one of the colors of my design, whether if it's a built-in design, I can choose that and turn it into applique. But let's take that heart that I sent over. I turn it into embroidery. I select the color, and now it's applique. Now let's bring over the third part of the piece. I want to create my own fabric, and I can do that with Print Moda. I took an image of a rose and I arranged it just in a beautiful kaleidoscope of color. And I printed that fabric and placed it on in the Scan and Cut. I took my design I created on the Stellaire from the Scan and Cut, sent it over to the Scan and Cut, cut it out, and I have one complete embroidery design created with that trifecta of creativity. Now the XJ2 also is a sewing machine, and it has a large 11.25-inch opening, beautiful lighting. It has 760 built-in stitches, from quilting stitches to applique to utility. It even has automatic stippling and some beautiful decorative stitches that are very, very wide. It also has an automatic 1/4 inch feature which moves the needle over a 1/4 inch from the foot, and you can use the laser guidance it has on there so you can just do some beautiful piecing. It also has amazing fabric control with an automatic fabric sensor, and this gives you the ability to sense multiple layers like in denim, or if I want to sew on some sheer fabric like this tricot, I can do that beautifully. Or even working with elastics, it handles the fabric beautifully. If it's even more extreme, we can add the digital dual feed. This is a belt-driven feed system that gives perfect contact on the fabric. And so you see here with this marine vinyl, there's no slippage. I also can use it with such things as minky, which is hard to sew with, and of course, quilting. So let's talk about the special we have on the Stellaire XJ2. This is the combination sewing and embroidery machine. This has a manufacturer suggested list price of $12,999.99, and it's on sale for $9,999.99. We have interest-free payments, plus we're offering free shipping across the country. But wait, we have a special bonus. We're going to include that Print Moda Studio, that fabric printer by Brother. That has a retail value of $1,499, and that's included free for a limited time. Now, let's say we want the ultimate package, the trifecta of creativity. That's when we add the Scan and Cut. So you add the Scan and Cut, now we have all three items, and we have that on sale for $10,749.98. We have interest-free payments and free shipping across the country. But wait, this is for a limited time. Now, if I want just the dedicated embroidery, let's say you already have a sewing machine and you want the XE2, which is dedicated embroidery, this has a manufacturer suggested retail price of $9,999.99. We have it on sale for $7,499.99. We're offering interest-free payments as well as free shipping across the country. And of course, we're going to include that bonus, the Print Moda Studio, free with the purchase, and that has a regular retail price of $1,499. But let's make it the ultimate, the trifecta of creativity. You will get the Scan and Cut added with that, and that total package for all three items is $8,249.98. And we do also have interest-free payments on that as well, and free shipping. But don't wait, this is a limited time offer. Click on the link to order. You can email us at customerservice@moores-sew.com or give us a call at 1-800-865-96